Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our two-part panel series, Supporting the Mental Health of Refugee and Asylee Communities. We thank you for your interest in our panel session that's taking place today and tomorrow, and we're going to get started momentarily. Just a reminder to everyone who is joining us that all attendees are muted and today's session is being recorded. We'll get started right at the top of the hour. All right, it looks like we're right at noon, so we can go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. Today we have a special panel session on supporting the mental health of refugee and asylee communities. This is part 1 of 2. We have 90 minutes together today, and we are excited to share this space together with 4 panelists with lived experience as a refugee, asylum seeker, and/or an advocate of refugee and asylee communities. Next slide, please. As we get ready to dive into these stories, we want to share with all our participants today that at the Mhttc network, one of our goals is to utilize affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all the work we are involved in. As we move through this panel series, we hope all will remain mindful of the many different perspectives that may come up in these discussions. We kindly ask everyone to communicate with one another during this learning series and outside of this space, using language that is respectful, non-judgmental, inclusive, and accepting of diverse cultures, genders, and experiences. Next slide, please. Thank you. A few other reminders for everyone before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted with slides to our Mhttc website within a week from today. You'll receive a notification by email when that's up and ready to be viewed. All participants are muted with your video off. And take note of the Zoom toolbox at the bottom of your screen. I see a lot of people are already actively engaging. That's great. I know we're all pretty much pros at using Zoom at this point, but just a reminder that we're going to use the chat box for things like tech issues and sharing conversations and discussions. But we're going to use the Q&A feature down there to ask questions for our panelists. So at any point, if you have a question for the panelists, please put it in the Q&A box. If you accidentally put it in the chat box, we'll have someone redirect you to place it in the Q&A box. And we do have the closed captioning turned on. You can just click on the CC icon on the bottom of your screen to enable that feature. Certificates of attendance will be available for those who attend 50% or more of today's session. That's going to be 45 minutes. And for this session, we are not going to be offering CEUs. Next slide, please. Now, here's an overview of what we have planned for today. First, we're going to provide an overview of the Mhttc network and our Building Health Equity and Cultural Responsiveness Working Group for those who have not interacted with our network previously. Then we will share the purpose and objectives for today's programming and introduce our panelists for today's session. We will then hear from all 4 of our panelists as they share their personal stories and they relate to the importance of mental health supports for refugee and asylee communities. And then we are aiming to have about 20 minutes to take live questions for our panelists from the audience. Then we're going to close up with a wrap-up activity and share information for part 2 of the series, which is taking place tomorrow at the same time. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. The Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network, also known as the Mhttc network, accelerates the adoption and implementation of mental health-related evidence-based practices across the nation. We do this by developing and disseminating mental health resources, providing free local and regional training and technical assistance, and increasing the awareness, knowledge, and skills of the mental health workforce. Our network includes 10 regional centers, a National American Indian and Alaska Native Center, a National Hispanic and Latino Center, and a network coordinating office. We invite you to find the center that serves your region by taking a look at this map or visiting our Mhttc website, and we'll drop the link to that in the chat box. Again, thank you all for being here today. And Christina, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Shelby. And just want to say we're so grateful to be with everyone today. I am humbled to be one of the co-chairs in our network for the Building Health Equity and Culturally Responsiveness working group. And that couldn't happen without all of the people in our network and folks today, including Jessica Gonzalez, who's behind the scenes making sure everything runs. So I just want to give a special thanks to her. So I'm from Region 10. I'm located in Seattle, and our network, Building Health Equity and Culturally Responsiveness Working Group, has representation from all the centers across our network with the goal to disseminate culturally appropriate information, provide technical assistance for the mental health field to improve access to culturally responsive mental health services. In previous years, we've developed a resource collection that highlights racial equity and cultural diversity resources developed by our network and external organizations. We also had a learning series last year where we engaged in interactive conversations about culturally inclusive mental health practices, including evidence-based practices and community-defined practices. For our current grant year we're in right now, our group chose to focus on the mental health needs of asylum seekers and refugee populations. Recognizing and appropriately responding to mental health needs among these communities pose a challenge because of differences in language, culture, as well as specific stressors and trauma associated with migration and resettlement. In addition to the need for culturally responsive approaches, we also know we lack the workforce capacity to adequately support these populations. So these exponential effects challenge leaders trying to mitigate mental health conditions within our newfound community members. So our small part and our hope is to do this 2-part panel series. Today is Voices and Stories, and tomorrow is Systems and Strategies. Another thing that inspired our timing was that Monday was World Refugee Day, and our former co-chair brought this up. And so that really helped us cement this week as when we wanted to do this panel. So each year on June 20th, we honor the strength and courage of people who've been forced to flee their home countries, to escape conflict or persecution. We try to build empathy and understanding for this plight and recognize their resilience in rebuilding their lives. So this again was another inspiration for this series happening this week. So through these panels, sessions, we aim to raise awareness about relevant mental health needs. We want to share best practices and strategies, and we want to differentiate between a cultural knowledge base and responsive approaches. So today we begin to address these objectives by bringing first the voices and stories of those with lived experience. It is my pleasure, and so I think we'll have all our panelists come on video. It is my pleasure to welcome our panelists. that they can unmute themselves, come on video, and provide just a 1 to 2 minute introduction of themselves to their background and their current role. And so I'll go first here. So we'll start with Rania, and then we'll do Hamid and Annie, and then Hasna, if you all want to go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. My name is Rania Awad, and I am somebody who is an advocate for refugees and asylees. I'm a psychiatrist by background based at Stanford University, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hamid Maktouf. I am from Iraq. I'm a former refugee. I'm a PhD student in counseling psychology. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Harper. I'm also an advocate for refugees. I do not have personal lived experience, but I work closely with people who do. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I'm a researcher in the Department of Psychiatry at Yale.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Hasna Samadi. I am from Afghanistan, and I'm working with Century Kitchen, a nonprofit who support refugee and immigrant women through job readiness programs. And also, I'm volunteer at IRIS, a resettlement agency for immigrant and refugees, and also student at college. Yeah, and also have lived experience, and I'm kind of advocate in my community here in New Haven, Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to get to your stories. So our learning objective for today is to really amplify and uplift and share the voices of those with lived experiences and those advocates, as we mentioned. So each presenter will have time to share their experiences, and we're hoping that through this experience, we will all become more aware of the life experiences, understand the challenges and trauma that impacts folks, understands how people's backgrounds prior to getting here affects their experience. What are the different types of journeys that people experience getting to the United States, and what did they face when they first got here? We also hope to learn what changes may need to be made or considered in approaching to better support these communities, especially after the initial arrival to the US. And then also understanding how we as helping organizations may better support refugee and asylum seeking communities. So each session will have, each speaker, will have 10 to 15 minutes to share their story in their own way. So with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Hasna and Annie.
Thank you. Actually, I'm from, as I said, I'm from Afghanistan. I just want to give you a brief introduction or a brief background of Afghanistan. I know you hear the name through news, but Afghanistan is more than 4 decades in it's a nation in war and conflict. And especially when in 1990s, the Taliban took over the Afghanistan, so they imposed very strict rule on women. And until today, women are not fully regaining their power and full rights. So, and it's more difficult for the women who were living in rural areas of Afghanistan. In the past 20 years, as you all know, there was some opportunities for women in big cities of Afghanistan. They could go to work or school, but in countryside and villages or some provinces, they were still stuck in home, and they didn't have the opportunity to go to study, get education, work, or have an independent human being's life. With all these situations in Afghanistan, Afghan women are suffering from mental health and anxiety, depression issues. And this is where you are from a country which is like mental health is a taboo, and that's exactly what is it in Afghanistan. Mental health and talking about mental issues is a taboo. And Human Rights Watch says that half of Afghan's population has mental illnesses. And the Afghanistan National Mental Health Survey conducted in 2018 found that over 2/3 victim of mental illnesses or in Afghanistan went through traumatic incidents and in their lifetime. Unfortunately, with all these problems in Afghanistan, we don't have much for mental, to support mental health people in need, but it's kind of very hard for people in rural area. Like in general, we don't have that much services for mental health, but in rural areas, it's more, it's less and even none. And people are seeking traditional kind of treatment for their anxiety and their depression symptoms. So, because as I mentioned, due to the existing stigma in Afghanistan. And all these problems when Afghan immigrants came to United States, because they've already been through many traumatic incidents in their lives, and they have already developed mental illnesses. And in addition, when they arrive here in the US, there is another chapter of life with different challenges such as language barrier, cultural shock, and lack of family and friend support, which is a backbone for Afghan culture. It's like in good and bad, Afghan are getting support from family and friends. That's very, very vital in Afghan society. Immigration itself is not really an easy choice. It's a tough choice. It doesn't end with just migrating to another country. It's a process, a painful process. Sometimes it takes decades, years or decades to feel home and feel that you're resettled in that country. And because when you're leaving, you're immigrating, you're leaving your country, your family, friends, your language, your culture, and all those achievements you have until that day, you're leaving everything and you are starting life from zero. And immigration is very difficult when you came from a third world country to United States, like from Afghanistan. It's huge. The cultural shock is huge, and mostly for women, because the way of life in Afghanistan and here is totally different. In some cases, it's the opposite, where these women grow up. In New Haven, we have Afghan immigrations, and majority of them are from rural areas, and where women are not able to read and write in their own language and have many children. By seeing all these and in COVID pandemic, as you all know, it was something that impact everybody's life, but especially this vulnerable community, the impact was huge because they were stuck in home with many children and different ages with online schools. So we saw the suffering of them in that community, the increasing stressor and anxiety in that community. So two of my friends and I started CREW, Collective for Refugee and Immigrants Wellbeing. This is a pilot project that we are partnering with YAL, PARCH, in Program for Recovery and Community Health, which Dr. Annie Harper can speak more about their role in this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Hosna. So as I said, the reason I'm here is as an advocate. I did work in Afghanistan many years ago and have spent many years in Pakistan. My husband is Pakistani. And I've lived in New Haven for a long time, but haven't really worked on refugee issues. So when Crew brought this project to us more than a year ago now, it was exciting opportunity for me to be able to make that connection that I've had kind of in my private life, but to try and do something about it professionally. So at the Program for Covering Community Health, we do a ton of things, but really our focus is on community engaged research and practice to address mental health issues. And we are very, very committed to community engaged research that centers the voices of people with lived experience. So when Crew approached us and said, we want to try to do something to help this population, but we don't really know where to start, our suggestion was that we do what's called a co-design activity. So that's essentially when it's a structured activity where you bring all the people who are struggling with a particular issue into a space, and it's a structured workshop that takes people through identification of the challenges, identification of the strengths, and then identification of the solutions. The idea being that really a solution isn't going to work unless it comes from the voices of lived expertise. This was not an easy thing to do. Crew is collective. Oh, Hosna, remind me what the acronym is. Crew, CRIW, Collective Refugee and Immigrant Wellbeing. Is that right?
Yes,
Yes.
Refugee and Immigrants Women's Wellbeing.
Yes. So Crew and Perch partnered on this. And as I said, it was not an easy endeavor during COVID with a group of women who don't speak English, who prefer not to be in a space with men, and who mostly don't drive, and who almost entirely have many small children. To try and bring that together was a kind of 8-month operation, but we finally managed to make it happen a couple of months ago. So we had between 30 and 40 women, many children in a gymnasium, and we went through this workshop, and thank goodness for Hosna, because she really kept the whole thing together. So the goal was to try and identify what mental health challenges women have and what would be the best way to address this. And what was incredibly interesting is that while the women acknowledged having mental health challenges, when we asked them to identify the main challenges they were facing and to kind of prioritize what they really wanted to focus on, it was almost all not what we would describe as mental health problems, right? So the things that kind of rose to the top were language, right? So the really challenging to learn English, particularly when most curricula, even though there are English language opportunities available, they're not designed for people who don't read or write in any language. And that is the case for most of the women in this population. So learning English when you're not literate in any language is a huge challenge. Having to take the citizenship test, having to get a driving license, dealing with applications and bills and paperwork when you don't speak English, can't use Google Translate because of the inability to read or write. That's like problem number one. Other problems related to children, a fear that the children are going to lose the ability to speak Pashto and kind of lose their culture, not being able to help children with their homework, children and parents being frustrated that children aren't given opportunities to pray at school, bullying, serious financial difficulties, trouble paying bills, paying rent, understanding the subsidies that are out there and applying for them, transportation when you're unable to drive, and then serious anxiety about the safety of family members in Afghanistan. These were the issues that were brought to kind of the forefront while we were doing this co-design activity. And for me, I'm a cultural anthropologist. I study the social determinants of mental health. It was really exciting to see that people were recognizing that what's disturbing our mental health are these issues, and this is what we need help with. So that's now we're moving forward to the next step, which is trying to identify how can we help women address those issues and also at the same time deal with the mental health challenges that we all know they're having. And I'll just finish by saying, while women prioritized kind of practical material issues that we're going to be working on, that absolutely doesn't mean that mental health isn't a problem. As Hosna said, it's a taboo to talk about it. So some of what we heard was probably people kind of deflecting mental health onto more practical issues, though we do acknowledge that dealing with those practical issues will be a huge step towards addressing mental health challenges. Also, just to point out, this is not, it's sometimes when I hear narratives of people in New Haven, there's this assumption that this is a homogeneous community, right? They're all Pashto speaking from 2 or 3 provinces in Afghanistan. You know, the assumption is they all have the same types of problems, and absolutely that is not true. So again, for some, mental health care is a very urgent need. For some, dealing with those kind of more material issues is an urgent need. And for many people, both are urgent needs. So I'm going to hand it back to Hosna now, who'll share some of her own experiences in accessing mental health care, and also some experiences of friends that she's close to in the same community. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Yes, as I talked about the problems before, when I came here in 2016, I faced the same problem. I had small children. I was stuck with them in home because of they were not school age, so I had to send them to daycare. It was not affordable for me and couldn't find daycare for them. So I was stuck in home and a stay-home mom with 2 children, not knowing the language, with all those difficulties. And we did not have any family and friends and relatives here in United States, not just New Haven. And due to language barrier, I wasn't able to integrate into society. And just one thing I'm trying to say, some people might thought that when you arrive to United States, when you get become refugee or immigrant to United States, and by arriving, so all the problems are just done. You're enjoying your life. Unfortunately, it's not the case. I wish it was. It's not that easy. By coming here, there are a whole new set of challenges we face when we arrive. We face many of those challenges, and I felt alone, isolated, and didn't feel like I belonged to the society. I also felt really useless when I came here, because in Afghanistan, I was an active member of my society, and I was able to help women there. And here in the United States, I couldn't even help myself. And I had already faced traumatic incidents in Afghanistan due to Afghanistan's security situation and problems. And these new challenges added to my problems, and I became depressed, and I need to seek care and treatment. And I was discussing my stress with my close friends, and one of my friends from the community, she was in similar situation, but in some cases worse. She was seeing many psychiatrists and taking medication, and also the treatment that was helpful and that she needed, she was not able to get it through her Medicare or medication plan insurance. So she couldn't get that. But after a while, when the husband got a new job, so she was able to get that treatment, but it was for a while. And after the job changed, the insurance plan changed, and that was stopped. So she couldn't pay out of her pocket because it was a very expensive insurance, expensive treatment. Without insurance, it was not possible. And at the same time, it's very hard when she was talking, and I had the same experience as well. When you were changing the psychologist or psychiatrist or the therapist, it's very difficult because the relationship you are building with the therapist that you're talking about your personal issues, it's difficult to find. That takes time, and then after a while, due to your insurance plan, you have to change that, and you are getting new therapists. It's hard for everyone, I understand that, but it's harder for those people who are from very close cultures, like Afghanistan, it's very hard for them to even share at the beginning. But when they're building the trust and they're kind of opening to share their problems. So I can jokingly say that for an Afghan woman, it will be easy to change any relationship, but not the therapist, because it takes time to build that relationship and trust that person and talk with them openly. And unfortunately, this is not just immigration problem. I think it's in general, even for the people in United States who are American-born people and who are citizen here, Americans. So in general, this is everyone's problem. But I guess in immigrants, it's putting more pressure on them. So by adding that, yes, thank you so much for your time and giving the opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much, Hasna and Annie. That I was taking so many notes. It's so wonderful to hear your stories from your experiences and what you learned, what you thought you might hear, and what you learned in reality. So thank you so much. I think we will now go to Hamid.
Hi, everyone again. So I just want to share with you guys two small stories very quick. So I born and raised in Iraq, and I was born in 1996, and during the invasion of United States to Iraq, I was 7 years old. And in Iraq, this is the time when kids start going to school. Unfortunately, the war stopped me going to school, and I was a child. I don't really know anything. I don't know what's going on. I just hear bombs. I see helicopters bombing my neighborhood, seeing people freaking out. I have no idea what's going on as a child. So I don't know if you guys know Sadr City. I'm from Baghdad, Iraq. Sadr City, which is one of, call it like the toughest neighborhood. So yeah, the invasion takes so much from us as a country and as a people and as a human being. Man, I start seeing people die in the city at very young age, and I couldn't do anything. All I was thinking when I was a child, I was like thinking that's how life is. That's how we live a life. And until my two older brothers being taken by the US Army to the jail, I was the only man at home, and my dad got killed during this war, and he's an innocent man. He never done anything. He was just a worker and got shot and killed. So yeah, I don't remember if I do have any childhood memories, you know, like all I remember if I reflect back and want to think is war, kill, bombing, and all that. And the question to come to my head, why is that? Why is us? Why is Iraq? What we have done? And growing up without education, it was the toughest things, because I feel like if you don't have education, you're kind of blind. You can't see. Maybe you can see with your eyes, but you don't really know what's going on. So yeah, start work at the age of 8 to support my family, support my mom, because in my culture, women like cannot work, especially when women doesn't have degree, or at least where I'm from, not all Iraq, from very cultural place. Sadr City is kind of dominated by tribe rules. And from there, we start seeing, you know, militias groups fighting back with the US troops. And I just thought that's how I'm going to spend my life, the rest of my life, maybe standing up like my people, fight back for our country or our city or whatever, until I turn 15 and I don't speak I mean, I don't try to read in Arabic. And I was lucky enough to teach myself. And yeah, I forced to leave my home by myself at the age of 15 because I thought like, should be not like this. We're human, we like anybody. I was watching TV shows and watching movies. People outside of Iraq, it seems like have life, but we don't. The only thing I know is war, bombing, and all that. And I was digging down for the question, why is Iraq? Why is us? Why is it me? Why is my family? Until I left Iraq at the age of 15, I was entered Turkey like illegal and stayed there. And I come to United States when I was almost 17. No education background. I don't speak any English. I know only 2 words, yes and no. When people ask me, what's your name? I'll be yes. Where you come from? No. So yeah, my journey to the US, it was really shocking. So when I come to the US, I was supposed to be living with the family, but unfortunately the family have some issue that they put me in the group home. And that group home, it doesn't actually design for kids like me, like refugee kid or someone who was like, growing up with family and find that the house I was living, most kids have a drugs problem. And none of them speak Arabic, none of them are Muslim. And the people, the staff who was working in this home, they was treating us like a police officers. Like I could not leave my house. I mean, the house where I was living in, can do anything. If I want to go, I was an athlete. So when I was like trying to go outside, they want me to sign paper to tell them where I'm going. If somebody want to come to see me, they have to have a driver's license and all that. But at the time I wasn't speaking English. So after almost like a year, when I start learning and start understand what's going on. So that was like around 2014. And then I start seeing like the way they treated me is not like a human being. They was treating me very bad. I couldn't, do anything that I want to do. Can't hang out with the friends, can't bring the friends like, outside to sit with them, is literally watching me free, whatever I do. Until one time, one of the workers at this home, she was white American woman who was like hating me for no reason. Usually like when we want to like making food, we have to make food our own. Like I have to make it by myself. And as I mentioned, I was like running track, cross country in the school and all that. So I used to train all the time. And one of the weekend, I went for a very long run, like about 10 miles, whatever. And I come back, I want to make a breakfast for myself. And they usually keep the knives at the house. So I went to ask the woman if she can give me the knife. They bought it at the office, sorry. So I asked her if she can give me the knife where I can cook some breakfast for myself. This woman, she was like, sit down and I will bring in 10 minutes. Wait 10 minutes. She didn't come. Went back. Asked for the knife again to make breakfast for myself. She did exactly the same. Like sit down. And then I was a kid. I got upset. And then I would start yelling. And I went to my room. And I just realized there is somebody knocking on my door. And I opened the door. There was like 2 police officers hold the gun in my face. And I was like, hold up, wait, what's going on? So basically that woman lied to the police, I told her I'm going to kill her. And I never said that. And I talked to the police. Thank God there was like one of the police officers was a woman and she was nice to me. So yeah, and then they took me to the hospital, forced me to go to the hospital. And after that, they kicked me out of the house. And here what I realized, actually, my mental health start like increasing. I was having so many like dealing, like coming from a war, leaving my family, seeing all this death in my life, and then come to America to seek better life. And then that's how I see, like, kick me out, treat me like not a human. I literally went back and I told them, I want to go back to Iraq. I vowed to die in Iraq better than staying here, living a city like a, you know, being a homeless and getting die here. At least I go back to my family. At least when I die, somebody can, you know, take care of my body. So yeah, I got, you know, I was lucky enough to, my coach from high school was really good man who was support me and was like, wait, we can help you, we can do something about that. So anyway, find me family to live with them just to graduate from high school. And then during that time in high school, you know, I start really like thinking about my mental health, thinking about like what's going on, like I need to do some. So, and then I start seeing counseling and start seeking treatment, and I start getting better. And yeah, from there, I know what I want to do in my life. I want to become a therapist. I want to treat people like Hamid, like many refugees, you know, who been suffering from trauma, being suffering from all this war, all this messed up things keep happening in this world. And graduated from Seattle University with my bachelor. I was lucky enough to be on full ride scholarship, and then getting accepted to the doctoral program in counseling at the University of Illinois, working with my wonderful advisor, Dr. Helen Neville. I think she's in the crowd here. So yeah, now my big concerns is learning about treatment and help refugees and immigrants. Like my big things I'm worried about, how actually like counselors can help those immigrants, help those, you know, refugees. A lot of those immigrants, like especially Iraqis who come from a country that being damaged from the US and come to the US. Some people, like a lot of people think like, okay, so come to the US, life is gonna change, their hobby and all that. Trust me, those people are forced to leave their country. Iraq is not a poor country. We hold the second largest oil in the whole world. We could leave just from or literally from our water, from like our farms, from all that. Even we don't need use the oil things. So all these refugees, they forced to leave. There is engineers, there is doctors, there is amazing people who left just because of the war. And then when they come to the US, literally they're not getting the basic need they want, which is support, mental health support, health systems, like education, all that. I know so many people who drop out of schools because they can't like continue learning when they don't speak any English. They can get support from schools. I know people until this day suffering from so many traumatic life events and being affecting them on their life every single day. And I just want to know, you know, let you all know, and especially therapists, be mindful when you see like when you work with refugees. Be mindful of like their experiences. There is people going to therapy, but when they don't feel like they belong to the therapist, they quit, because sometimes people feel like no one is actually listening to me. No one is understand my feeling and what I'm going through. And also to, you know, many others like people like who live in the United States. Refugees are forced to come here. They not, you know, trying to steal somebody's job, as what they say before, or trying to take over. No one want to leave home. We love our homes. We love to be in homes. But unfortunately, that's what life causes us. And that's why, you know, sometimes like you gotta do whatever to survive and help yourself. And by the way, I know a lot of people call refugees survivors. I don't think they survivors. I think they are achievers, because the word of survivors is, I don't feel like is a good fit for refugees, because imagine how many miles they, you know, how many miles, how many, like, you know, days and night, you know, walk, cross to come to where they at here. So yeah, all I want to say like that, as a person, as a human being, I hope like this, my story can help you to understand other people's like experiences. And I hope in the future, as Hamid, as a person who can help my community. And that's my biggest goal right now. I want to get my PhD in counseling psychology, and hopefully someday I can work with the, you know, with the program like Doctor Without Borders, so I can travel refugee camps. I can, you know, help the community. And yeah, thank you all. God bless you all, and appreciate you.
Wow. I mean, thank you so much for sharing that story. Lots of responses in the chat, so many powerful things that you shared. And again, thank you so much for sharing your story and the reframing. I love the achievers. People mentioned that as well. I know we'll get to questions and other reflections in just a moment, but I think we'll turn it now to Rania, and then we'll get to questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And in many ways, I have the harder task here of kind of being the last speaker and tying in a lot of really wonderful reflections. My deep appreciation for what you've shared, Hamid, I really appreciate that. And for Hosna as well. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful and difficult to hear what both of you have shared. Thank you, of course, to Annie also. You know, I'm really here, as I mentioned at the beginning, as an advocate, somebody who has worked closely with refugees and asylees, both in the US and globally, internationally. And in many ways, I find myself being a cultural broker. So many of the points that Hamid and Hosna both shared, which I will emphasize again in my reflection here, is exactly the kind of work that I do. In order for us to really understand, to do the best we can do with folks who are seeking asylum and are refugees in this country here, to really make sure that we're doing the best we can. And it's like what Hamid said, you know, to really be aware, almost like have that extra sensitivity really around it. But it's beyond just sensitivity. I don't really like that term of, oh, cultural sensitivity, or, you know, even words like culturally informed sometimes rub me the wrong way. I like the term much more cultural congruency. And I think that's what my reflection, where I'll start today. And let me give you a little brief information on some of the work I've done so that you know where I'm coming from. As a psychiatrist, you know, at Stanford University, one of my roles is the director of a lab. It's a research lab it's called the Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab. And this is a one-of-a-kind lab in the country. And one of our lines of research is on global mental health. Under that line of work, there's a lot of work on refugee mental health specifically. The work I've done really was focused mostly on Syrian and Iraqi refugees, both here and then internationally. And then more recently, Afghan refugees, particularly here in the San Francisco Bay Area where I'm located. We have the largest Afghan community outside of Kabul. And so there is a lot of work that we're doing with all three populations. And first, I'll share with you a little bit about the work related to the Syrian refugees, since, you know, that population continues to be one of the largest displaced communities. In very soon after the crisis in Syria started, we took some trips to Jordan, where a lot of the Syrian refugees were kind of fleeing and going to Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon. what we found were countries that were really trying very hard to accommodate large numbers of people with resources in which they couldn't even really help their own countries in many ways, let alone all the newcomers that were coming in. I traveled with an organization that's local to the Bay Area called Al-Alusi Foundation. And its founder is an Iraqi gentleman who is a wonderful philanthropist and somebody who has done work in many different parts of the world with this organization. But what was really unique about the Alusi Foundation's work is that it focused on one of the points that Hosna brought up and Hamid also really emphasized, which is that mental health. These are the invisible wounds. When we think about crisis, we often think about the human necessities we need for daily living: food, clothing, shelter. These are the things that are most immediately visible, and they come up in the stories that we've heard just right now. But what's not always visible, but often deeper wounds and deeper struggles, is actually mental health. And I don't just mean PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I actually mean that for many people who are refugees and asylum seekers, it is ongoing, it is chronic, it is current. It's not a post-traumatic, it is an ongoing trauma. And both our speakers beautifully highlighted how it's not just that you come to this country as a refugee and asylum seeker and suddenly all is well and it all goes away. In fact, in many ways, that acculturation, as the term we use in the field, says that's actually sometimes even more difficult than the original difficulties, if you can even imagine that. And someone might think, what do you mean there's bombs falling on someone's head, or they're completely displaced out of their living areas and so on? How could it be more difficult here? Well, in many ways, there was some, and this Hamid's story highlighted this so well, even though there are massive difficulties in a war-torn area, it's still the country of origin. There's still people speaking the same language. Not to say that it's any better, but rather to say coming here is a whole other set of difficulties. And we've heard that today, being able to adjust, even just learning the language, right? Let alone figuring out schooling and education, being able to work and become a meaningful, integrated member of the society here. Some of the work that we did when we were overseas was really what we call the train the trainers model. And this was really important because it was set up for those who are working directly with those who are going to be, soon to be refugees and asylum seekers, whether to the US or to Europe. Mostly I would say Europe, because the US has had, especially in a previous administration, the least amount of refugees taken, particularly for certain countries, and certainly a travel ban that also affected this greatly. But as we were working with folks who were going to be transitioning to that next stage of their life, part of the work that we were doing in a train the trainers model is really understanding what are the cultural and religiously congruent types of training and care that we can provide. And some of that, and we came up with an interesting model, which on a different occasion we can share, or maybe we can share some links to some of this work on it's called CPR Care Program for Refugees. And it followed a really wonderful program in which it really focused on 5 levels. And the levels were things like, ethics. It went through, diagnostic understanding of mental health conditions, psychoeducation, brain-based therapy, and just kind of listing some of the steps of the work that we did. And then this concept of post-traumatic growth. So how do you grow and adapt after you've been through some pretty difficult levels of trauma, and then you continue to be in difficulties, as we mentioned? This program was unique in that it was developed all by people, because we were working with Syrian and Iraqi refugees who are Arabic speaking, of Arab culture and background. They were developed all by Arabic speaking, Arab background psychiatrists and mental health professionals who were trained here in the US, but had that cultural understanding, and also were able to integrate parts of healing, which had to do with spirituality in some cases that was often neglected in more of a secular mental health space, and also aspects of cultural understanding and healing methods. This is very similar, by the way, to the work we're doing today with the Afghan refugees who are newly arrived to the US here locally, which is another project, as I mentioned. But this concept of making sure that mental health, access to mental health is much more possible. And we hear this very clearly in Husna's story, right, of her friend. The person who every time there was a new shift in a job or insurance shifting, they lost complete ability to be able to have the very medications that help them, or restarting with a therapist again and again. And often in the work that I do in kind of cultural relevance and training is understanding that sometimes that gap is pretty wide, and how do you bridge that gap? Because it's not always going to be a matching situation, won't always be possible, right? Somebody from the exact same background, or at least language background, to be the therapist of that person. I'm so glad for folks like, Hamida are coming into the field, but that's not going to be possible for every person. So what do? You do a lot of this cultural relevance kind of training, which I encourage everyone here to really partake in. And we're happy to, share some links to the work that we do. Also, another point that I wanted to make is re-emphasizing the point of this was not by choice. And so therefore, in many ways, there is actually not only just a longing to go back to one's home country in some cases, but also a real sense of displacement. And it further is fueled, and we have to speak truth to power here. It's further fueled when you have a social political situation in which you're coming into and you're being told, you don't belong here, right? And I think Hamid's story kind of emphasized that pretty clearly as well. And so part of the work that we're doing and we're encouraging folks to take on is not just cultural and a spiritual congruency in the very work that they offer, but in addition to that, really broadening that understanding of, for most of the folks that are in the refugee and asylum seeking community, they're not here by choice. And in many times, because of the difficulty, and it may feel like they're kind of feeling this, it sounds ungrateful, but it's not about being ungrateful. It's that it's actually a longing for a home community that is stable, not one that's unstable. But in addition to just not being fully integrated, or being very point blank told, you're not supposed to be here to integrate in the first place. And thirdly, to really say, and this is my final point, it's really important to understand that there's a lot of pride in terms of where someone comes from and their home background. Sometimes we put these, I call it our Western blinders on, and I'm somebody who was born and raised here, so kind of these blinders on, and we say, here is what's perfect and excellent. And honestly, that's not always the case. We put these, sometimes these, we see the world through this kind of telescope, right? Binoculars of almost looking at another situation and saying, oh my goodness, do you see how they treat women there? Oh, terrible, right? And I'm not saying that there aren't difficulties and actual real issues that need to be solved, but there are also differences, key differences, and cultural elements that need to be understood as well, and not judged, in fact, because that also puts quite a bit of barriers for people to be able to get that support and help that they need, or to be able to open up, or to be able to consider, that post-traumatic growth, right? Being able to grow from where they have been. So I hope some of these reflections have been helpful in just tying the whole story together. And we welcome your questions, and thank you so much for having me here with you to reflect a little bit.
Oh, thank you so much, Rania. That was also very powerful, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And yeah, so it is definitely time for questions. So I'll just pop that on the screen, and we'll, I know there are a couple that were already in the Q&A box. So I will stop sharing, and please, if you have others, please do throw those in. And if the folks on our panel can hop back on, we'll read these to you. So the first one was to Hosna. Are you able to discuss some of the traditional ways used for dealing with mental health in Afghanistan? And are these traditions utilized while here in America? And I know, because I think you hadn't spoken, Hamid, yet, I imagine this question could easily go to you as well. So maybe we could start with Hosna, and then if Hamid, you want to add to that, that would be great.
Thank you for asking that question. I knew that would be like kind of what type of treatments or traditional therapies. Usually in my country, there are like, we call it ziyarat or ziyara, which is a holy place. People are taking the people with the symptoms like anxiety, depression, mental illness, they're taking those people, instead of bringing it to a psychiatrist or thinking of other treatments, they're taking it to that holy place or a holy person, not even imam. Sometimes to imam, but sometimes just a holy person that they believe that person is a good person and he can treat people without any degree. And no, we don't have that in United States. So that could be another thing, that even like mentally when they are getting that power, like, okay, we went there, probably that will help. Even we don't have that here. So yes.
Great, thank you. Hamid, do you want to also have a chance to answer?
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Oh, no, absolutely. So the question was, are you able to discuss some of the traditional ways used for dealing with mental health in your home country? And are these traditional traditions utilized while here in America, or even available, I guess, as you said, Hosna?
Thank you. Absolutely not. So as a Muslim community, we always, like, when someone suffer from something, we seek to like all religions. As Hasna said, like, could be like going to like a masjid or talking to some sheikh or something like that. But because here in the United States is very limited places to to get that help, it is not really. And yeah, and also like I want to mention that like even a lot of people who want to stick to therapy, when they working with the psychiatrists or psychologists who not from the same religions, that going to make it more difficult, going to make it harder if they do not actually understand what they come from, and they don't really know like about their own beliefs. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I have a follow-up, but I'd love to see if Annie or Rania also have anything to add. I certainly want to, get your expertise as well.
I could just quickly share. I mean, this is actually one of my particular lines of research and something we published on quite a bit in the lab. In fact, whether traditional ways of healing, which is what the question was asking, but also, are there, ways that could actually be integrated in with the current mental health system, whether that be medications, therapy, other forms of treatments that we tend to prescribe today. And knowing and having, and hopefully this can, folks can visit our lab and we'll provide that site. But things like if you're able to, in addition to talk therapy, bring through with it, along with it, some of the, like Hamid was mentioning, spiritual aspects. People are always looking out for that because that's what they're holding on to. Especially if they're a God-centered community, like if there's somebody who's, traditionally practicing a certain faith or religion. In this case, most of the refugees population of the world today is actually Muslim. And so it's really important to understand that most Muslims, this is what our research shows, most Muslims actually hold on to something bigger than themselves in terms of healing. And when that's lacking in therapy, it's often, it feels very stifling. It almost feels like it's a limited amount of healing. So much more to share on that, maybe in a different space, but I'm definitely happy to provide links to any of our papers that kind of give that explanation. And we've actually published a book called Islamically Integrated Psychotherapy. So there's actually a model called the TIP model that we've published that people can actually, if they're curious about this or even want to be trained in it, it's something that's now a model that's been developed.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Annie, I think you shook your head. Just want to make sure you didn't. Okay. Pardon me. I think a bigger question that's on my mind that I think relates to this question is, are these terms like mental health used in the same way in your home countries? That's I think the thing that, I think a couple of you have spoken about, but is our concept of mental health, which is of course not uniform even in the United States, something that exists the way we think it does here, in other places, because I think it's sort of like, oh, we need the mental health things, or people have mental health issues because of these things. And maybe these terms aren't even the right terms, but I was just curious. That was just what occurred to me when people were talking. It's something I've heard before. So if Hosna or Hamid, do you want to respond to that? Feel free. Otherwise, we can certainly move on to the other questions.
Yeah, so as you know, I'm going to speak for Iraq. So most Iraqi people, they use religions as like treatment to cope from like any stress, any traumatic things happen to them in their life, and actually it's work, because most people, kind of like therapy, when you believe in something in your heart that is going to help you, is going to help you. So yeah, but I want to say that as well, that like Iraq is not, like, treatment for psychotherapy is not popular. So, and especially after what happened like in Iraq, I think is really needed right now.
Thank you. Hosna, did you want to respond to my question? If not, that's totally fine. We have a lot more questions coming up into the Q&A.
As Hamid said, that unfortunately in Afghanistan also we don't have much like as the mental health services, and so they're basically kind of, even when they're coming here, the most important thing with refugee and immigrant is to first that get them introduced to that system. Sometimes just talking to someone is considered as waste of time, honestly, in immigrant. That's even I was talking that with my American friend, and she told me, oh, it's not just immigrants. So it's sometimes we don't believe that either, don't worry. So that's something that talking to therapists consider as a waste of time. So the importance of that and those things is very important to be discussed with refugee and immigrants, and the impact what a huge impact they have. But at the same time, yes, people in Afghanistan also, as they said, as I mentioned before, and they're using holy places or imam, and seeking the treatment through just the religious stuff.
Great, thank you so much. So another question, do you see many issues regarding families being separated, in particular children from their parents or caregivers during this process? And if anyone wants to speak to that, that would be great.
Sadly, as you all know, the recent incidents in Afghanistan and the evacuation process, there were a lot of people, they were separated. Even children, infant, like toddlers, they were separated from their families, and they were back in Afghanistan, their family are here, or families are in Afghanistan, they're here, which is a huge impact on has in their life. And I personally know one of the woman whose child is in Afghanistan, and he is 5 years old, and he cannot come because they cannot go back there. And also through the immigration process, there is a lot of challenges. And even if everything is done, they need someone to bring that child. And due to the Afghanistan situation, these parents cannot go and cannot travel. And they are not giving visa to other member of family to bring that child to them. So it's a big problem, a huge problem in the community. And I can speak for Afghans, especially in the last year. There's a lot of family members who were separated, and they're going through a lot. Hopefully the government or the people who can help consider these problems and in this toughest situation in Afghanistan.
I want to say something very quick. For all you guys who participate right now in this panel, imagine you don't see your child for just 1 week, or you don't see mom or father for a month. And thinking about those refugees who being separated for years. That's going to increase your stress, your anxiety, everything you do in your life, even if you have the amazing, perfect life you have. So remember that.
Absolutely. And of course, the earthquake and everything's on our minds. So thank you for mentioning that as well, Hosna. Another question about your comment around speaking about sharing space with achievers. How do you think folks can keep that in mind? You know, I appreciated what you said about don't maybe just refer to folks as survivors, which in some sense that's, of course, you know, relevant, but it's not really the umbrella term. I think I heard you sort of say, Hamid. So I don't know if you wanted to speak more to that, or if others had comments on how can we have the change to be more mindful of what you've been through, and not just what you've been through, but what you're achieving despite all of that, and maybe even because of all that. So however you want to share.
Yeah, so we hear that a lot. I think people sometimes dismiss their word and how they can, if you want to show empathy or sympathy, I think you want to use that for yourself to help yourself, not, that's in my opinion, not for refugees. I'm going to use one small example. If today we raise, like, if you have a child who raised like 100 dash and win the first place, oh, he's an achiever. But what about those people who cross mountains, oceans, sleep outside, you know, don't have food to eat, don't have anything. They just hope for something. How they not being achievers? And in my opinion, I could be wrong, but I strongly believe in that. Those people should be refugees and immigrants. They should reward achiever more than anybody, because whatever who left home and left whatever they have and start new life and start building things new, and just like leave, just the idea of leaving the place and come and have all this courage, they achieving something. So that's why they should be called achievers. And I hear that a lot sometimes, like people like, oh, you are survivors. Excuse me, I am not survivor, I am achiever. So yeah.
Thank you so much. That's really, really helpful perspective. A couple of questions that I'm going to blend together here are about helping people feel welcome when first coming, I guess, to this country. I know context depends, situation depends. But so how can we make people feel welcome if we know people are coming from other places? I like this question as well. What is the first hope that could be communicated to someone who is first coming to the United States? So I guess that welcoming, that was part of our goal in this session as well, sort of think about as people are just arriving or just making their way through the United States culture shock and society. What can we do to make things potentially in any way feel more welcome or hopeful?
I can jump, I guess. Just to treat them like a human being, just to treat them like you. Don't look at their skin color. Don't look at them like me having thick accent when I speak sometimes. People look at me like that. No, don't do that. They just like you. Maybe you just like, you know, we difference in looking or belief or, you know, background, but at the end of the day, we are a human being. Just remember that. And yeah, just to treat them like any other human being.
I just can say one thing. Treat them. What do you want to be treated in a country when you go there and you are a refugee like us? How do you want to be treated? Just treat them like that. The treatment that you want for yourself.
Annie or Rania, any input? Okay. I think we covered this a tiny bit, but in case you wanted to add to this, the question is, what is the taboo part described in people not wanting to talk about mental health? So I know we kind of talked about how is mental health sort of addressed or conceived or not in home countries. But can you talk about the taboo of mental health, and if that's relevant to you or your experience, what does that mean and what can we know about that? And sorry, most of these questions are not given to specific people, so anyone can jump in if you have an answer or a reflection.
I think both Hosna and Hamid kind of mentioned a little bit about the taboos already. Some of them are shared globally. Honestly, this is not specific to any one community. In general, none of us really like to be told that something is wrong with us, or told go talk to somebody who's outside of your own friend and family circle. Quote unquote, air your dirty laundry to a stranger, et cetera, et cetera. So these things are universal, honestly, related to mental health. The parts related to that may be more specific and more connected to this larger group, which here I'll just say the broader communities, because there are different cultures that we're referring to and in which there's similarities. There's also a common thread of there being a Muslim background. And so I'll speak to that specific piece for a moment, and then I'll welcome the other panelists if they want to add anything to the cultural pieces to all of this. Some of the taboos and some of the research that we've done on kind of barriers and access to mental health. Some of our papers are related to, perceptions. I actually have a fully validated psychometric scale specifically on, perceptions and attitudes to mental health amongst Muslims. And the papers are published on that and the scale is available. But what we found, the thing to share here is actually for many people, it's not something that's exclusive to, oh, it's just a spiritual ailment. For many people, it's actually understood that there's both a biological, spiritual, environmental kind of multifactorial understanding of mental illness. The problem isn't so much the understanding. It's actually a lot more of not finding the types of care that reflect all of those things together. That's kind of in a nutshell what I can share with you. So what I mentioned earlier about if you go to therapy or you go to a psychiatrist and you're just given a pill, or you're you're in therapy, but you're speaking from very much a rigidly secular frame, but also one that is very rigid in the sense that it doesn't take into effect any cultural nuance. It feels very off-putting. And I've had people affected by, as refugees and asylum seekers who have said to me, and I've asked things like, why, Hamid mentioned this, like, why did you quit therapy, right? And the response is almost always, the gap between me and the therapist was just too wide. I felt exhausted trying to catch the therapist up to where it is that I am and what my background is, what my story is. Or the opposite. I've actually heard that sometimes the therapist is very helpful, but it's, and I'm going to quote somebody here who said to me, who was actually affected by the travel ban, but it's similar in that, she said the therapist was oozing empathy and it wasn't productive in any way. And so either extreme was not very useful. And so this is why I mentioned about the attitudes and perceptions. It's really when you are able to provide the type of mental health care that actually is holistic and that it speaks to, yes, the biology and the hormones and the genetics and all the neuroscience, but also speaks to the cultural nuance, the spiritual nuance, and also speaks to the community, the environment the person lives in. When you're able to get all of those together, then people might be much more amenable to actually accessing that care in the first place. And I think that's part of the bigger challenge here. And it's true for many communities. I don't want to say this is only for this community, these communities, but there's certainly a characteristic here. And one more thing, I'll just share one more thing. Historically, there is a historical piece to this, and anybody who's heard me speak before know I love speaking about the history of Muslim mental health originally, but there is a rich tradition within this particular faith and this particular group of people who actually historically are the very first in world history to put psychiatric wards within their hospitals, for example. So mental health is not an issue in itself for this community, right? Like that is so forward thinking. The Bimatistans or the Maristans of the past, the hospitals of the past, that's what they had. And today when you see a breakdown of that and people only going to their faith leaders or only going to ziyarat, as mentioned by Husna and so on, it's because they're missing that holistic component that used to be available to them traditionally. So just some reflections on that.
Thank you so much. I did want to just acknowledge we have about 1 more minute, and I wanted to ask a question for you, Rania, because it was addressed to you. I do know there are a couple other questions about what initiatives or things in communities or what national policies can assist and help. Tomorrow is our systems and strategies session. And so I'm going to actually bring those questions over for us tomorrow, and that will also be recorded as well. So not ignoring the question, just wanted to bring those there since we are running out of time here, but in maybe a minute or so, Rania, could you describe when considering worldview and culture, can you talk about the importance of having researchers in the mental health arena, starting the process of looking at EBPs, evidence-based practices, but then also thinking of those cultural lenses and making sure that community practitioners and other folks are at the table? So how can we have the right lens in, mental health arena and research and that sort of thing?
Absolutely. And what a challenge with 1 minute to go. But it's great because tomorrow there's a whole panel in which I'm sure this will be discussed in much more detail. What I will say is something very simple. You can't even begin to have this discussion or even bring in these other worldviews into the discussion if they're not at the table. If you don't have a seat at the table in the first place, this is never really going to come up. And all we are able to really offer is the same kind of templated, canned processes, right, that are already in existence, which, as we already have heard today, don't fully fulfill everything that these groups need. And so I really appreciate it, even in this discussion or even in the chat just today, I'm seeing people collaborate, kind of reach out, we're working on this. Would you like to help with that? How about people, let's make sure that we invite those voices. This webinar has been so powerful because the very voices of lived experience are here, and you're hearing nuance that maybe isn't there in a different kind of setting. So I'll just end by saying, making sure that the folks are actually at the table and not, I see this all the time in the quote unquote ivory tower of academia. If we don't ever come off of that tower and kind of go into the community to the people who are actually themselves need to lead the discussions, we then kind of write and research about people instead of them writing their own narratives about themselves and us leading from behind and assisting. So I hope that's a useful way of conceptualizing it.
Thank you so much. You did great in just a minute or so. I just want to say, and I echo everything that's been in the chat. Everyone has been awed, so moved, and just sharing the courage to come and share your story and how much you have all, from what I have learned, which has been also a pleasure through this process, that giving back to your community, to the field, putting your heart and soul and all your achievements into this very, very important work. So I just want to thank you. We're going to kind of move on towards our closing activity, and would ask that if folks can share just one thing in the chat, something you've learned about this experience that you're taking away from today, a key nugget, a key insight, a light bulb moment, a heartfelt feeling that you got, that would be really great, because we're hoping that this has been a positive experience. It sure seems like that from the chat. So thank you for throwing those things into the chat. And we just want to thank everybody for participating, the whole panel. And we're so grateful to have all of your perspectives and just finding the time to do this with us. For all the folks that are on the call, it's been amazing to see so many people here today. So I'll just try to see some of the answers. No single right way to connect the isolation that folks feel upon entering this country. I've seen so many things throughout the whole thing that's been amazing. Mental health goes beyond the individual. Empathy overload is not helpful. Reframing the achiever. I think we're all going to walk away with that, Hamid. Everyone is going to experience that. And just thinking about what anyone needs, like any human being. So I really appreciate those comments. Thanks everybody for putting those in the chat. So I think I'll turn it back over to Shelby, and she's going to walk us through our last closing slides.
Yes, thank you so much, Christina. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. It's certainly been a pleasure bringing this session to everyone. And just want to send a reminder, I did see in the chat box a few people asking, but today's presentation slides and recording and access to the certificate of attendance, that's all going to be sent to everyone who participated today via email in about a week. And we'll also make the materials available on the Mhttc website. And just a reminder that we do have a second part of this series scheduled to take place tomorrow at the same time as today. And we're going to be focusing on systems and strategies. And we have 3 panelists who serve refugee and asylee communities in different capacities. The link to register, we're going to drop that in the chat box right now if you haven't already had a chance to register. Next slide, please. We also want to share some resources with you, starting with our collection of resources to support the mental health of refugees and asylum seekers. We also encourage you to connect with the Mhttc Center in your region so you can learn more about the trainings and technical assistance activities available to you free at no cost. Please also follow us on social media at Mhttc Network. And we also hope you'll subscribe to our monthly newsletter so you can stay in the loop about future offerings, especially if you enjoyed the panel that we had today. Next slide, please. And last but not least, we do ask you to complete a brief survey about today's training. I saw that it was dropped into the chat box already a few times. We'll drop it in again. We'll also redirect you to the survey when you close the webinar window, and a link to the survey will also be included in that follow-up email that you receive after the session in about a week. And thank you again to all of our panelists for helping us bring our vision for this session to fruition. We'd also like to send a special thanks to our Building Health Equity and Cultural Responsiveness Working Group members and all of our Mhttc colleagues for supporting and helping plan this series. Please take care of yourselves and have a lovely rest of your day. I hope to see everyone back here tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you so much.